Welcome to Breaking Sales, a podcast dedicated to helping you have tough, meaningful, and rewarding conversations with your prospects and clients. In meaningful, what we mean is these are the conversations you truly feel like you are the prospect or client's conversational peer. There's no anxiousness or uncertainty holding you back. You feel a sense of calm and confidence in asking the tough questions. You're not thrown off by the bad news, and you expect the prospect to think about and invest into the conversation as much as you do. On Breaking Sales, we use the filter of psychology and innate human behavior to deconstruct the many misleading sales approaches that actually work against your efforts to build trust and close the business. Let's get started. Think of how much time you invest each day in certain routines and habits that you probably take for granted: showering, eating, sleeping, and other activities. What if I told you that the number one activity, outside of sleeping, that you invest the most in each and every day and you put the most time and effort into are your conversations? For most of you, whether you're a leader, a teammate, or a sales professional, there's a good chance that the amount you earn, what you get paid, is directly tied to the quality of your conversations and your ability to stay resilient while having them. Why resilience? Let's face it, how often does a sales conversation or process go without a hitch? Conversation resilience is your ability to stay composed, curious, and confident when conversations take turns that you don't want. When the prospect seems disengaged despite a warm referral. When the meeting shifts from a positive possibility to an apparent dead end. When you hear responses that trigger your worst fears about losing the deal. Today, I'm breaking down what conversation resilience actually means and why developing it is critical to your success. I'll share the real story of how this skill landed me my first client after 16 months of rejection, mortgage payments looming, infant twins at home, and serious doubts about whether I'd chosen the wrong path. If you've ever left a meeting wishing you'd stayed composed and asked better questions instead of retreating or over-explaining, this episode offers a very different approach. Let's get started. Today on Breaking Sales, you get me, just me. No Pam and Christy, they're both traveling. Today we're going to talk about conversation resilience. It's that bend but don't break mentality. It's when you go into that meeting and you're expecting to hear A, but instead you hear B and C. And B and C aren't what you want to hear. That requires a bit of conversation resilience. It's when the conversation turns from a positive, possibly, to a negative. It might be when you're referred in by someone you trust, so you go into the meeting with the prospect thinking that you're going to be received with open arms, warmth, or at least some kind of interest in talking. Instead, what you receive from the prospect is a cold demeanor. And you can tell they're taking the meeting out of obligation. Those are all great examples, everyday examples of why conversation resilience is so important. It's your ability to stay calm, confident, and curious, even under or within the line of fire, when you're not hearing what you want to hear and that conversation's going a direction that you don't want it to go. Let's take a step back, though. What is a conversation? We talk about them all the time here on Breaking Sales. Conversation is an exchange of ideas, experiences, and trust. It's the playing field that all of you compete in now, and you get paid to compete. It determines the quality of your relationships, the trust you build. As a business leader, the quality of your conversations is all about the intent that you have when you are sitting with one of your teammates, one of your employees, and you're giving feedback. The quality of your conversations in sales is, does the prospect trust the intent of your questions and the objectivity of your recommendations and suggestions? But let's even take a further step back. The fact is that conversations make up most of what we do. Research suggests that on any average day, we, because we're a very social animal, human nature is to be very social, we spend and we invest 4 to 4.5 hours each and every day in conversations or some form of communication. That's 60 days per year. Let's compare that to other things that we do every day. Taking a shower, right? 12.5 minutes on average a day. That's 3 days a year. Eating. We spend about 1.4 hours eating every day. That's 22 days per year. How about health or exercise? Again, we spend 1.4 hours a day, health and exercise activities. That's 26 days per year. If you break it down even further, all three of those things don't even add up still to the 60 days per year we spend investing in conversations with family, friends, teammates, prospects, clients, etc. Our conversations represent over 20% of our day and how we spend it and how we invest in it. Breaking down our conversations and how to have really good ones is what a lot of what we do here on Breaking Sales. Part of that, especially recently, as I've been doing more and more research on the idea of tough conversations, meaningful conversations, the power of positive tension and so forth within conversations, what separates good conversations from bad conversations, etc., I've come across some interesting research. The first piece is preparation. Right? It's been researched and suggested that the more we prepare for a conversation, whether it's giving tough feedback, asking tough questions as a parent, as a leader, as a sales professional, the quality of that conversation is impacted 60 to 70% by the preparation that we put into it. And actually, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because we've actually talked about preparation many times on this podcast. We've actually talked about this particular statistic that's always stood out to me, which is that an NFL football player, right, will practice and prep 44 hours on average during the week just for the chance to play 6.5 minutes on Sunday. That's 44 hours of prep and preparation to play 6.5 minutes. Question to everybody listening, how do you prep? What investment are you making in that prep and that practice to sit with that prospect for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 60 minutes? The other piece I came across in my research recently, and we talk about it all the time here on Breaking Sales, is to be very clear on your intent, whether giving feedback as a leader, giving feedback to a prospect or a teammate, or being prepared to ask tough, meaningful questions. Your intent should focus on the other person first. Yes, you can sit down and think about what do you want to get out of the meeting? What do you want to accomplish in the meeting? But that intent should still align with how you might be there to help the other person. And help the other person might be simply helping them think different about the problem they're facing. Helping them think with more objectivity about the choices that they have. Not necessarily dictating those choices. It's also important to be neutral and objective. And we talk about that a lot on the podcast. The neutrality and the objectiveness comes from our ability to avoid the temptation of assigning value to what we hear in the conversations. And then lastly, the research suggests that curiosity always trumps expertise. If I look at these 4 different criteria for prepping for tough, meaningful conversations, the preparation, the intent, the neutrality, and the curiosity. It makes me think back on one of my first wins. If some of you listeners remember, that first win came about 16 months into my endeavor in starting my business. I was 0 for 9 up to that point. I had twins that were under 3 years old. Mortgage, utilities, health insurance, groceries, car payments. But yet I had no clients, no income, no earning, and at times it felt like no clue. I also had a lot of pressure just from social sources, neighbors, asking me, what am I doing? What am I thinking? Get my head out of my butt. I need to go back to corporate America. I even had a mentor tell me that coaching was probably not going to be for me because I was too nice of a guy. I know some of you hear that and you probably laugh as you hear that. But I remember back on that one conversation where I went out to see a prospect. It was my third time with them. It was the president and the CFO. I was expecting them to tell me, yes, they were going to make the investment. They were going to hire me to coach and train their people. When I sat down in the boardroom, their boardroom, I got the opposite. The CFO looks at me, and I still remember this, and he says, Dan, I want to thank you for your time. You've done a great job. You've done what we've expected. We're not in a position right now to make this investment. We have other priorities. It was at that moment where something just clicked different. I don't know if it was just fed up. I don't know what it was. But I remember looking at the CFO and just calmly saying, I hear you, I understand. Do you mind if I ask a few questions? The CFO says yes. My first question was, I appreciate the feedback, what you've shared. Can you tell me a little bit more, though, about what do you mean when you said, I did what you expected? And he answered with, well, you asked great questions. You got us thinking. You helped us kind of plan out more objectively what we needed to do. So you really helped us gain a better perspective. I said, okay. Do you mind if I continue asking a few more questions, and let's just take coaching off the table for a second. Let's just focus on you and your business. And he says, yeah, of course. I said, okay. So if you don't do the training to grow revenue and you don't do the training to bring in new logos and new clients, what are your other options at this point? And he said, good question. We're going to do better tracking, and we're going to try to set up more consistent accountability. And we're going to do some more deal dissections or reviews like you've talked to us about. I said, okay. I said, haven't you already done those in the past? And he said, yeah. I go, all right. What makes this time different? And there was silence in the room. That is an example of conversation resilience, where we're willing to stay in the game. And one of the keys to staying in the game regarding conversation resilience is benevolence. As long as you're benevolent, that your intent is focused first and foremost on the other person, you absolutely can up your assertiveness. You can absolutely increase the degree or quality or intensity of your questions, but only if they actually serve the other person or the company. That particular prospect did become a client. If I remember correctly, though, it wasn't for another 30 to 45 days. But still, the big takeaway was the idea around stay in the game, stay resilient, bend but don't break. Don't lose track of what you're there to accomplish. And if you're in sales, which my gut is you more than likely are, or otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, you have to have that mentality of bend, don't break, right? The high intent, which is all about how and if they need help. And it may or may not need to include me, but I need to help them gain objectivity and perspective in that process that they go through in determining where and how they might need help. That's the idea around conversation resilience. It's just simply staying in the game. So that's conversation resilience. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time. If you take nothing else from this episode, understand this. Conversation resilience doesn't mean having the nerves of steel or being naturally unflappable. It comes down to two things: preparation and a purposeful mindset. The preparation piece is knowing what questions to ask when things don't go the way you planned. Before your next important conversation, think through the scenarios that might knock you off balance. What will you ask if they say they're not ready? What will you explore if they mention budget constraints or competing priorities? What questions will uncover what's really holding them back versus what they're willing to say in the moment out loud to you? The mindset piece is staying focused on serving the other person, even when your own anxiety is screaming at you to control the outcome, what you want. When your intent genuinely centers on helping them achieve clarity and objectivity rather than securing your commissions, you can push much harder with your questions without destroying trust. In fact, you may build more of it. Years ago in that boardroom with those executives, I stayed in the game because I genuinely wanted to help them think through their decision objectively. That's what made the difference between me walking out with nothing and eventually landing the client. The next time a conversation shifts in an unwelcome direction, remember, bend, but don't break. Stay curious. Ask questions that help them see what they might be missing. That's conversation resilience in action. Thanks for tuning in.